Ladies and gents, and this is Europe prior to World War I, Alliances, Enemies, Prelude to World War I, Part 1, with the channel, The Great War. I like this because not many videos covers this topic, like, okay, we know about World War and how it all, happened, but how the Europe was before World War I. I know that Germany was like a scientific hub of the world before that, even in somewhere industrialized economical hub too. After World Wars, basically, where they, killed each other in Europe, everybody, at the major scale at least, it changed the landscape. USA became, scientific hub because first of all the German scientists fled the country after World War II, right? World War I, World War II, basically, made sure that major scientists and everybody just went to USA and places like that. So America become the major scientific hub and also economical hub after World Wars. But Germany was that, right? Before that, Germany was seen as this powerhouse where you could find major scientists, major, smart people there and everything. So yeah, to understand World War I completely, you need to understand what happened before. In 1914, Europe was on the verge of modernity. The German Reich, France, Great Britain, and Austria-Hungary were fighting over influences and colonies. Russia was gaining more and more power, while the Ottoman Empire was only a shadow of its former self. Yeah, they've been, for I guess few centuries they were, stuck, right? They were not gaining more territories, but slowly they were losing, to places like Prussia and Russia, and everybody was taking it bit by bit. So yeah. Meanwhile, smaller nations were striving towards independence to fulfill their dream of being a sovereign state. In our first special episode, this is the first one, about the prelude to World War I, India explains what Europe was like in 1914. This is going to be fun. This is an entire channel on the Great War, so entire channel is based on World War I. That is big, right? That requires certain level of confidence. Like World War I could make so much content and related to this. I know so much that I'm going to create an entire channel after that. So let's watch this one.
My name is Indy Nidell, and welcome to our new channel.
Man, this is his channel. This guy has lots of channels, right? There are so many channels I've seen him in. This guy has so many channels.
The Great War. This show follows World War I from July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918, week by week, exactly 100 years later. But in order for the initial weeks of the war to make more sense, we're doing these Prelude to War episodes to give you a little background. All here on our new channel, The Great War. Do you know what happened 100 years ago last month? On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. This was the little match that ignited the bonfire of the First World War. Now, it took a full month after the assassination for war to be declared. And on July 28, 2014, it is exactly 100 years since the beginning of World War I, or the Great War as it was called, or even the war to end all wars. And unlike pretty much every other World War I show ever, we're going to ignore Franz Ferdinand for the moment and talk about some other stuff.
Seriously.
The consequences of the Great War were
all the channels basically starts from there. This guy's talking about before that. This is awesome.
Massive and affected pretty much every person in every country on Earth. 4 great empires ceased to exist. A bunch of new nations saw the light of day, and the explosive growth of an extraordinary number of social movements, such as internationalism or fascism, changed the world's political landscape forever. Just in terms of technology, the Great War moved the world ahead by leaps and bounds. Cars and planes had existed prior to the war, but by 1918 we had tanks and diesel fuel, bombers and fighters, and large planes ready to be converted into the first airliners. And the tragedies were enormous. Although completely accurate records are impossible.
Yeah, about the airliners. First of all, people took these large planes and made it somewhat of a cargo plane, because that's the first step you do with some kind of a technology like that. You make sure trading is easier, right? And some guy thought, wait a minute. If we can transport lots of cargo like this, we can transport lots of people like this. So somebody just thought, oh, what the hell? Let's put people in, put some champagne and everything, make a luxury ride out of it.
The war caused close to 40 million casualties, killed or wounded, including nearly 10 million dead soldiers, in a world whose population was only a quarter of what it is now. But why the Great War? Why start it? Why go through with it? There had certainly been enough talk about a European war during the early parts of the 20th century. Sometimes romantically, such as when military leaders who'd never actually seen combat thought about coming home covered in glory. But most often, it was talked about as a necessity. And this was driven by waves of revolutionary sentiment, strikes and violent labor unrest, and above all, feverish nationalism, which together came to steer the course of Europe in the early 20th century. Now, we'll go into that in detail, week by week.
Yeah, feverish nationalism, that was pretty strong before the World War I, basically. And everybody was at each other's throat, right? They needed a reason.
Think about a German Europe, not today, but 100 years ago. It's a theme that was certainly tossed around back then, most spectacularly in the bestseller Mitteleuropa. And I don't mean the Nazi kind of German Europe, but a true German-influenced and culturally and politically dominated Europe. You see, Prussia and then a unified Germany had emerged as the leading power in Europe after beating France under Bismarck in 1871, and things had just rolled on since then. By 1914, Berlin was the cultural capital of Europe, where you went if you wanted to study anything serious. Words like Hertz, Röntgen, Mach, and Diesel all come from this period. And British cabinet ministers, Russian Bolsheviks, they'd all studied in Germany, which had even replaced England as the industrial giant of Europe. Many people, not just German, dreamed of a German Europe, or at least a multinational German Commonwealth. Now, this Commonwealth could protect itself from England or the United States, could bring in raw materials from France and Scandinavia, would have its own coal and steel production, and hopefully even colonies in North Africa or in the Middle East where there was oil. It was an impressive dream, and it wasn't that far-fetched, especially when you think about what was going on outside of Europe at the time. See, Africa and India were basically being run from Europe. China was ready to collapse. The Ottoman Empire looked ready to collapse. What Germany really needed to do to succeed was to work with its German-speaking neighbor to the south. Germany had been allied with Austria since 1879. There was, though, a big problem with the Austro-Hungarian Empire because it was really shaky. Now, there's several reasons for this, but one big one that I'm going to mention right here, Austria had a serious mismanagement problem. Actually, when you look at the world around it, Austria was an anachronism. The rest of Europe was going through a huge age of nationalism, but in Austria, there were 15 different versions of the national anthem. Franz Joseph, the emperor, had been on the throne since 1848, and he was 84.
Yeah, but Austria-Hungary is basically, come from Holy Roman Empire, right? Before that, it was Holy Roman Empire, and even there was so many divides. There was no one unifying thing there. It was just Holy Roman Empire, but even there were lots of different places among them that basically was constantly revolting because there is so much difference there.
4 years old, and he too was very out of place in modern Europe. And he made very questionable decisions. In 1908, for example, he made the decision to annex Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were nominally part of the Ottoman Empire. Now, this basically pissed everyone off, especially the Ottoman Empire. There were protests from all of the great empires, but especially noisy protests from Bosnia's neighbor, Serbia. And I don't know if it's quite possible for me to express just how much anti-Austrian sentiment there was among the Slavic nations and the peoples of the Balkans. Now, looking back, you might have thought Vienna would have said, okay, you guys can have a sort of pan-Slavic nation under Vienna, which might have cooled things off a bit, but they didn't do that. What they did instead was nothing at all. You see, for years, Vienna had been trying to control its minority nations by basically paying them off, to the extent that they had no money left for things like the army. Austria spent less money on its army than England did, even though the Austrian army was 10 times the size.
Yeah.
So they couldn't afford to keep trying to buy them off, which didn't work out anyway. So Vienna basically did nothing and hoped there would be no catastrophic events. That didn't work out so good. Now, does this sound really complicated? Well, it is. There hadn't been a real European war in over 40 years, war being kept at bay by a complicated and constantly shifting system of alliances. Now, you should look it up yourself because it's really interesting, but here's the basics.
Yeah, 40 years seems, you think like 40 years, but 40 years at the time was a big thing, right? Because every decade and decade or two, there is some war with some European nation for some reason. 40 years is a big thing. So it's basically like, Europe's been at each other's throat for centuries, for some reason here and there. Then 40 years because of the alliances and because trading is good and it's industrialized, revolution. Everybody just thought, let's just chill out, and everybody just made allies. But it created this pressure point because they have to fight, right? Because that's how they've been doing for past centuries. So this pressure point resulted in World War One because everybody was itching and everybody had alliance. So clearly, if one or two nations fight, everybody fights because everybody is allied and everybody has an excuse now. And obviously, creating this issue with Serbia. And then the Archduke Ferdinand just thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a convertible, no roof, no nothing, where, people are just, have real hate toward Austria. I'm going to go there and I'm going to talk to them because, you can be reasonable with literally everyone. There is no bad elements anywhere who will just basically try to kill you.
Germany and Austria-Hungary were 2/3 of the Triple Alliance, right? Italy being the third part at the time, but nobody really counted on them to help out in case of a war. Yeah. Germany and France had historically been at odds with each other, but even more so after Prussia walked all over France in the Franco-Prussian War. France and England were allied, but it turned out that in the early 20th century, there were French contingency plans afoot to invade England, and vice versa, so go figure. When Bismarck had run Germany, he had cultivated...
You can't take that. You can't take that seriously. They've been planning to invade each other for centuries now. That's like everyday thing.
Russian friendship, but that was long gone. Much of the German elite now openly looked down on Russia, who allied herself with France when German industrial and military power really got going, and the Triple Entente between England, France, and Russia became official in 1907. The German Empire was friendly with the Ottoman Empire, and a true Russian nightmare would be the Germans in charge of the Dardanelles, through which Russia sent up to 90% of her wheat exports. Russia supported Serbia and all of the Slavic peoples, which meant they were banging heads with both Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, and everybody was worried about another Balkan explosion. That's almost...
Talking about geopolitical shitstorm, this is ridiculous, right? I mean, you can see how this all builds up, right? If you put it in some kind of a random AI simulation to go through, like, would this scenario happen again? I think it would scenario happen again if you're not careful, because, all of your, neighboring enemy will basically make ally with your enemy, right? So enemy of my enemy is my friend. That creates this kind of a weird chain thing that, has enemy all side, but also has allies all side. But all of them are bordering each other. And if one spark happens, one issue happens, like, I guess, Archduke getting shot, everybody try to kill each other. This was inevitable.
Almost it, but not quite. Before I go, I'd like to mention the unique case of Germany and Great Britain. Now, the Germans and the English admired each other culturally, industrially, and militarily. Germany especially admired England's vast overseas empire and her navy, the greatest the world had ever seen. And many Germans were convinced that the British Navy was the key to her success, her power, and her empire. Now, I'm going to quote historian Norman Stone. The last thing Germany needed was a problem with Great Britain, and the greatest mistake of the 20th century was made when Germany built a navy designed to attack her. Pretty heavy words, but think about it. The Kaiser, who occasionally ruled Germany by decree, totally ignoring the fact that the German people did not want war with anybody and admired and respected the British, built a navy. A navy built for only one purpose: to challenge Britain. Winston Churchill, at the time Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, suggested a mutual pause in naval building, reasoning that for the British Empire, a powerful navy was a necessity, but for the German Empire, a luxury. But Kaiser Wilhelm would not have it, and he built up the German Navy.
You could kind of see from the German perspective at its, at certain level, because Germany was the economical hub, the cultural hub, scientific hub at the time. Germany was prospering. It was massive industrialized, entire country. So when they're height at that level, you'd expect certain level of power in military, right? So they would think like, okay, Britain is way too powerful. Navy, we are not even close to that. We should at least try to get close to that, right? Same thing how Russia and USA did with the nuclear weapons. Like, we should at least, have equal to that or close to that, if nothing. So I think that's what Germany tried to do at that point. But obviously, Germany was also high with success, right? With everything that was happening, like, oh, we are the Germans, we are the hub of the Europe, right? We look down upon everything. So that was also kind of feeding it, like, okay, we must have a big ass army, even bigger than the Royal Navy. There was some mentality there too.
That navy took 1/3 of the German defense budget, which meant that Germany could not afford a two-front war against France and Russia if such a thing were to happen. And it It also meant that there were a bunch of giant battleships sitting in harbors, thumbing their noses at England. Now, there was substantial naval warfare, especially submarine warfare, between England and Germany during the war. But these battleships didn't do anything. They just sat there taking up space the entire war until their crews finally mutinied. They had much more armor than British ships, and they were really impressive, but they just sat there mocking England, whose response was to outbuild the German Navy 2-1 and make further defensive arrangements with France and Russia. That was interesting, right? Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here, but come back next time to see what was going on in Serbia, Italy, and other sunny places with long cultural histories. Don't forget to subscribe to get each new episode, and also, this show is available in German and Polish, so if you or your friends want to watch it, but English isn't your first language, links to those channels are below.
Yeah, I like this guy, he covers history really detailed. This was a great video. I loved it how, prelude to World War I. This was awesome. Nobody covers this. So this is part 1. There are other 2 parts. It's going to be fun reacting to that. Yeah, I mean, when people say during World War I, World War II, Europe kind of, destroyed each other. People say, what do you mean by destroyed? Destroyed as in that. It's not a major hub. Like how we see USA today for past few decades, more than few decades. How we see USA today, that's how the Germany and other European state was at the time. World War basically changed all of that. Alright people, if you like my reaction, like and subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the cards, press the cards, and yeah. If you want to react to any other video, comment down. And like I said, don't forget to like and subscribe so I know which videos to react to more. This is a new channel I'm reacting to. So I guess, yeah. And I'll see you next time.